What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers War Room on Steelers Touchdown Under. Looking forward to talking to you about three surprising stats, actually, about the Steelers offense. And then we'll talk about three stats that Steelers need to work on for the rest of the season. They've now kind of passed their halfway mark, in my point of view. I know they've only played 8 games, 17 games. It's almost halfway through there. They've had their bye. By the time this week finishes, they'll have their 10-day break. It is the right time to talk about some key stats. So let's crack into it. They're all going to be offensive as well. I'll do another show later in the week on defense following the same formula. But three surprising stats. This Steelers offense is well talked about. You saw a lot of comments from LeBron this week around the Lakers being like the Pittsburgh Steelers, being outscored and outplayed, but still winning games. That's how it is with the Steelers at the moment. But here's three stats that show that the Steelers offense might not be as bad as you think it is. Number one, the Steelers, despite everything going on with their quarterbacks, are actually 25th in the league for passing yards. 25th in the league, and quite a clear gap between them and the Bengals, and actually a bit of a gap between the Falcons too. But believe it or not, the Bengals, even Garoppolo, obviously we saw all the stuff going on with the Raiders. You've seen that result. The Steelers aren't last in the league. They are not last in the league. And interestingly, when you look at rushing, the Steelers' rush attack finally gets going, and we're 23rd in the league. 1 yard difference from 22nd in the Los Angeles Chargers. There's literally 25 yards difference to being in the top 20 in the league for rushing. And remember, New York at 20 have to run the ball heaps. So 22nd, 25th, it's actually better than it was last year, despite all the crap, even that myself, that we give Matt Canada. This ain't actually too bad. You look at interceptions, that was one area where I was like the Steelers having 6 interceptions. That's also not too bad with Kenny Pickett. A lot of people talk about the touchdowns. There's only 7 passing touchdowns on the league this year from Kenny and Mitch. But 6 interceptions is pretty low. They're playing low margin football. And yeah, that's not a surprise. But the surprising stat is that, like, look at the rest of the league. There are teams that are doing much better. The Eagles, the Dolphins, the Bills, even the Commanders, the Titans before this week in the way that they came into the game. Look at all where they are sitting in interceptions. Some of them are in the double digits. Kansas City Chiefs, 10 interceptions. 10 interceptions. So, yeah, and the Steelers aren't pushing the ball down the field and scoring. But that interception number, whilst it's high versus their touchdowns, I think it's quite low considering where they're sitting in terms of the experience of their team, the injuries they've had. And to me, that's why that's a surprising stat. Because what it says about this team, and particularly when you look at the yardage, is that this is actually starting to work. And when you have a defense that's as good as their defense is, yeah, we were definitely relying on the defense way too much. But the Steelers are creeping up the board here. The Steelers are creeping up the board in yards. I mean, 23rd and 25th, not too bad. And actually, the other stat that I was going to talk to you guys about instead of interceptions, so we'll actually do 4 of the surprising stats, is the rushing touchdowns. Now, 4 doesn't seem like that much through 8 games. But look at the league. 6 gets you top 15. 4, there's loads of teams stuck with 4. Top 20. So for all the flack that this Steelers offense gets, it's actually kind of middle of the road in the league. But you came here to hear the hook as well. And the hook really is not the surprising stats. It's the 3 stats that the Steelers have to improve. And they're pretty clear. They're really clear when you look at it. Because there'll be a big difference to see, in fact, actually, the Steelers offense does improve. Now, Steelers look high when you look at drive averages. That's because they've had their number of drives has been high. They've actually had, when you look at their drives, 92 offensive drives. Now, that's actually pretty high. That's because of how much the defense actually gets them the ball back. When you look at the plays, it's a lot lower, and that makes sense because of how many, like, the 3 and outs have had. But it's still top 20 in the league, right? Top 20 in the league. But they're not the stats I want to look at. I want to look at the stats of points, the start, where they're starting, and the time of their possession. So, the yards, the time, and the points. Because start, depends on kick return. Average yards per drive right now from the Pittsburgh Steelers is 24.3. It's the 3rd worst in the league. Now, if that improves, think about how they're going to improve both in the total yards they're getting in passing and the total yards they're getting in rushing. That will be a big deal for them. Second part, let's look at the time of possession. Now, again, this is obviously very much tied to yards, but 222. Now, there are, interestingly enough, 3 teams at 222. That is not a lot of time. Now, 20 seconds difference gets you kind of to the top 20 in the league again. Now, that's a big average. Like, that's going to improve your efficiency by 10%. But think about what that will do for the Steelers with their run game. And I think if you looked at the drives in this last game that they played, I think, off the top of my head, it was something like an average of 320. But I'll pull that up for everyone while we're listening now. But that's kind of an interesting perspective, actually, on the Steelers, because it demonstrates just that difference of what that makes. So their average drive was, so they had 28 minutes overall. So they had 9 drives, and they had the ball for over 28 minutes. So that lets you know that they've got the 3 minutes per drive. So that's kind of interesting in terms of how much improved, because 3 minutes per drive, if you average that across the league, you're top 5 in the league. Very hard for the team to score when you've got the ball, unless you throw interceptions. And we've just seen those Steelers aren't doing that. Now, the third area is around points. Now, that's not a surprising stat, but 129 is not good enough in terms of points. That's third worst in the league. The only person you're ahead of there is the Jets and the Giants. Yardage will help, but so will things. And again, it will improve that overall touchdown number that we talked about, where there's only 7 on the year. Deontay not dropping it on a slant in the end zone. Pickens dragging the foot. Now, I'm picking on 2 blokes there, but the reality is that you can't not have those plays come your way when you're a team that is that is evolving this much, that struggles to get going, that needs big splash plays to get going. I like what Brian McFadden talked about in the podcast with Pat P. He talked about Jalen Warren being like a microwave. He heats up quickly, but that's not actually a characteristic of most of the players on the Steelers team. A lot of them heat up actually very slow. So, as I said, 3 surprising stats are the Steelers and on their offense, 25th in the league, 25th in passing, 23rd in the rush game. Then you also look at it, and they're quite high in terms of the total rush touchdowns as well on the season, and they have quite a low level of interceptions. But the 3 stats that they particularly need to improve are their average time per drive, the average yards per drive, and also they need to pick up the average points per drive as well. If they can do those 3 things in the second half of the season, this team should easily win another 5 games, if not 7 games. And actually, they may well end up becoming a threat in the playoffs. But with that, as always, go Steelers.